What other ways can AEC leaders successfully guide their teams through innovation and transformation while applying tools like AI to drive sustainable change?
I did some research on large companies or tech companies that have been very successful at technology adoption. And the one common denominator in every single one of these was it was all about the culture. Culture trumps everything else. So innovation, transformation, it doesn't happen in the C-suite. It happens at the front lines. It's a grassroots movement. So if you...
Welcome to this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping engineering professionals find technology that fits their needs. The rapidly changing landscape of the AEC sector has made it clear that embracing AI-driven innovation is no longer a choice, but a necessity for leaders looking to stay competitive. With technological advancements transforming every aspect of the industry, staying ahead of the curve and understanding what's next for AEC leaders is essential. Join me in this episode as I speak with Peter Nabhan, PE, PMP, Lead AP BD+C, and Senior National Practice Leader at the ECS Group of Companies, about how AEC leaders can successfully guide their teams through transformation, apply AI to drive sustainable change, and prepare the next generation of engineers and scientists to take on the industry's grand mission. I'm your host, Nick Hyde, and this is the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast. With that, let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our conversation of the week with Peter Nabhan. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Nick. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, I know, we've talked a good bit here, and I think we're of the same mindset when it comes to innovation in this industry and moving it forward. So we're just going to jump into what I think is going to be a really exciting conversation. So Peter, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and what led you to your current role as Senior National Practice Leader at the ECS Group of Companies?
Happy to share. I'm going to go a little bit long-winded on this one, and there's a message from it. So I'm going to start at the beginning. My journey began in early 90s in Beirut, Lebanon, which I know you and I have spoken about. And I grew up on the back end of a 15-year civil war. So that war, unfortunately, decimated the entire infrastructure of my country. But on the plus side, that allowed me to grow up in a community where we all saw how tower cranes in the city were bringing life back into the city. And that was the reason why I decided that, when I grow up, I was going to become a civil engineer, because I really wanted to partake in that journey of, taking a hopeless place and bringing hope and creating value and creating a built environment for a community. So that was the inspiration behind that. And then I started my education in 2008, on the recession happening all over the world. That's when I started my education. It took me 5 years, and I graduated with a master's degree in structural. That's my first degree. We were about 90 people, and I think most of them either went to Europe, started working immediately, but yours truly said, I'm chasing a bigger dream. I want to go to the United States, and I want to pursue the American dream. So it took me 1 week. I defended my thesis. A week later, I was on an airplane headed to Reno, Nevada, with absolutely nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose at the time. Only had one suitcase and really everything to gain. And I landed in Reno in 2015, in August 2015. Spoke barely any English, honestly. And that's the time I go back to, is like, that's really when my second life began, is when I landed in Reno. And the reason why I'm telling you this whole story is because I want people to know, just from my journey and the journey of others, that it doesn't really matter where you come from. I think a lot of people come from, humble beginnings. They come from different places across the world. I think what matters is, if you want to make an impact and if you're willing to go the distance, that's what matters. So that's what I always tell people. I was like, it doesn't really matter where you come from, but how far you're willing to travel to make an impact. So then I started the journey. I started the life in Reno, Nevada. I worked actually on a very cool thesis project. It was predictive analysis for pavements for the state of Nevada, the DOT. So before AI was cool, we were doing AI at the time. And then I graduated in 2015 and I joined Terracon in Nashville, Tennessee. That's really where the learning happened. Like prior to that, I thought I was learning everything I needed maybe to graduate. But then when you actually start working, that's when you learn what needs to be done to be successful. And the first mentor I worked with, he was a senior VP at Terracon. He was running their pavement practice. And to my benefit, he was looking to retire within the next, 1 or 2 years. He wanted to retire early. He's like, I've done this enough, 30 plus years. And what that did is he just decided to fast track the transfer of information. So all his experience, every morning he would, spend 20 minutes with me. He's like, what happened yesterday? How would you have done this? How would you have done this different? And just teaching me. He spent about a year teaching me. And I think I just, I threw myself into any opportunity that came my way that first year. So I did travels across the Southeast, did projects all over the region. I did not say no to anything. And then one day, I think, around Christmas time, 2016. My boss, Tim, is like, yeah, I retire next week. So now this whole program is your program, and I'm going to send you a Skype link. I've never gotten on Skype before that. So just to put that into perspective, I had no idea how to conduct calls. I really didn't know what I was doing. But, and I asked him, I was like, Tim, what should I do? He's like, he just waved his hands like, you'll figure things out. No worries. It was tough. It was not easy. Everybody was so experienced around me. They all had like 20 plus years of experience. Some of them commercial real estate. Some of them worked for the clients. There were attorneys. I didn't know what an attorney was before those calls. And I do go back to that time. It's like, this is probably the time when I was the least intelligent person in the room. And was the time I probably learned the most. Is when you're in a room full of people that are way more intelligent than you. And because I did that, I was able to grow from, I started off as a staff engineer. I got into program management. I became a national account manager. And I got a chance to work on a big project. So I actually led that project for a logistics company. And that's when I was able to implement a lot of the inefficiencies I was seeing over the years. I was able to bring on technology to actually bridge those inefficiencies. And through that, and just give you a frame of reference, this was about $1 million worth of work, project, asset management. Saved about 20% through technology, and then reinvested that money into gold plating the project for the client, and provided a GIS platform. This was, again, new delivery method, new technology, GIS platform for this asset management project, which in return, the client loved. They gave us a 3-year staff augmentation contract as a result. So on the back end of that, that's when I started working on an AI integration. There was an AI startup company that at the time when I was with Terracon, that Terracon was looking to acquire. So it was part of the due diligence process, initial integration process. And then the deal closed in 2022, Q2 2022. And then in 2023, ECS came knocking. They were looking for someone to help with their national practice. And I had a lot of transferable experience from my time at Terracon. And I joined ECS and was able to build a healthcare practice for them and also continue on that technology trend. So I know this is way longer than you expected, but I was hoping to paint a full picture for the conversation today.
And I'm glad you did, because, to the audience, listen to this great story from, growing up in a war-torn country to seeing it kind of rise from the ashes, moving to the United States, barely speaking English, getting a degree, moving into practice, right? And over the course of, right, it's been about a decade since you landed in Reno, Nevada, right?
Yeah. So
And
landed in 13, and 2015 is TerraCon, so it's been about a decade in practice.
so a decade in practice, right? Going from, right, barely speaking English to a national practice leader, right? From just a staff engineer to a national practice lead. And it's a really inspiring story, Peter, because look what it shows. Like it shows, like you said, if you're just determined and you're focused on what you want and you work at it, right? And I think a little bit of having the right attitude and people around you, like you can do it. So and I'm really glad you shared because it is a great example of what's possible.
Yeah, happy to do so. Absolutely. And thank you and we do this so we can help the next generation. This says nothing about us or me in particular. This is about how can we help enable the next generation to take on this leap in their career, in their life, so they can also feel that reward that we're able to feel. And again, I'm so happy that you provide people with a platform like this so they can really tell a story. And I think it's very valuable. So thank you so much for doing this, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great segue into our next topic, right? Technology and specifically AI, because the next generation of individuals coming into the industry, right, are, I would say, their outlook on how things could or should be done in a company as it relates to the use of technology, I think is different than even me being, 5 to 10 years older, right? And then even beyond as you move up the ranks in a company. So what's great about this platform to me as well, along with everything you mentioned, is saying, look, there's interest in technology. There are practitioners applying it, right? This is a great profession. And here are some examples of how people are doing it in practice. So then, Peter, let's talk AI. It's a hot topic across all industries. There's a lot of skepticism in real world applications, specifically in AEC. So how do you define AI's role in our industry today, and what do you see as its most promising applications in the near future?
I think to your point, just AI has been such a hot topic, and I can understand why people have skepticism because we've seen a lot of trends in our society. I mean, I've been here for 12 years. I've seen a few trends come and go. But what I like to do, anytime I talk about AI, what I like to do is I like to break it down to the fundamental pieces, like using first principles thinking. AI in general, I mean, what I would like to tell people is like AI is data or large data sets meets statistical analysis to create patterns and help decision making. So AI is not a black box. It's something that we've created. It's a human creation to aid and assist us in making better decisions. And it's also an unbelievably big time saver. So if we go in and we break it down to those small pieces, we're basically demystifying what AI is. And then that's when we can start thinking about some very good application. You did mention like promising applications. I think one of the biggest ones, and this is just what I see from my world, any task that is repetitive, that is slow, and it doesn't really help you, gain a new skill, that's a task that we can take away from, the person doing it, free up their time so they can be more creative, they can be enjoying their job better, they have higher job satisfaction, and they don't have to complain about this super, trivial repetitive tasks. So I think that's one of the biggest initial uses of AI in that case. Obviously, I think another one is when you look at large data sets, and a lot of us, as engineers, you're an engineer yourself, we're very good with Excel, right? You probably use Excel a lot, all the time, and you do regression analysis, and you do predictive analysis, and you try to, find the smallest error. AI can do that way faster than we can. Just like that. Exactly. So I think that's another really good use case from that standpoint. I think in my world, like data collection, and in your world as well, data collection, point clouds, information that you're getting from LiDAR. You can set the variable and you can optimize AI to actually give you the results at a fraction of the time that it will take a human being looking at it. So that's a big use case, in my opinion. And I think another one that I really think about is a lot of times because we're so tied to construction, and I've worked in construction throughout my career, or construction adjacent, it's so reactive. Like every single day, there's a million problems that you have to solve by close of business. And then the next day you get a new set of problems. But you never have your eyes looking towards the future. It's like I'm always solving for yesterday's problems or today's problems, and it's always running fast, and I'm always running out of time. I think what AI can do is it can detect the patterns of behavior of some people. It can look at the schedule, look at some of the deltas, and it can provide us better tools to solve those problems. And in solving those problems better, it frees up our time and creativity to also do more from that standpoint. So I think 3 early use cases would probably be the first way for AI integration, I think, in our industry.
And I really like that explanation, Peter. And to give some examples to the audience, right? Let's take, right, analysis of pavement or concrete, right? Like you can actually, through techniques like photogrammetry or even LiDAR, right, you can detect a crack. What's the size of it, right? Based on specifications or standards. Do I need to, seal this crack with hot rubberized asphalt, right? Do I need to maybe pave and mill? And it's what we would know through pattern recognitions as humans through experience, but just applying that knowledge to a machine that just quite frankly can do things faster than we can. But that doesn't mean that the human's taken out of the equation, because these models of course need training, number one, which is derived from us, and then oversight, because what we do is highly regulated, and it's important to make sure it's done correctly, which is where I think the opportunity for human machine collaboration in particular is very exciting.
Exactly. And I think what some people don't realize, that the use of AI and that use case you just mentioned, that's the world I lived in for many, many years. And I've also lived in a world prior to that where all the data collection was done in the field manually. You're walking large, areas of pavement. There's moving vehicles. It's not always safe. The risk is so high. All of that data collection, automation just reduces the risk as well. And you're able to do so much more with the time that you have. Because your time, that's the only limiting factor. Is we all have 168 hours every week. That's it. We don't get any more. We don't get any less. And just being able to do more with that time, I think is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and another great example is, right, if imagine this, pavement surveys, right? You're walking a lot, or in the case of like road and highway, right? You're walking or driving. But imagine a self-driving car with sensors, right, that can clearly capture like the state of the infrastructure, and then being able to analyze that data from the comfort of your office. And you may want to go back out and verify conditions and be hands-on, but it's definitely a more targeted approach, making more efficient use of your time. So to the audience, like we're just trying to provide practical real life use cases of this technology, because as Peter alluded to, there's a lot said about artificial intelligence, but I don't know that as many practical use cases are being shared. So it's good to have this discussion.
Absolutely. And I know there is a community that you and I have talked about, which is phenomenal, but that community is highlighting some of those use cases in the world of AI, and just giving people visibility to that community so they can see the use cases will be very, very helpful.
Absolutely. So Peter, that's a good segue into our next question, right? So There are, of course, misconceptions that I think ultimately erode trust in both the public, practicing engineers, and really anybody that's curious about the technology. So, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about AI in the AEC space, and how can firms begin integrating AI in a meaningful way?
I really like this question, and I'll tell you how I went through about it. So I was talking with a colleague a few days ago, and this is a environmental scientist. He's younger, probably 10 to 15 years of experience, and he was against using AI altogether. And I asked him, I was like, is this a misconception? And he said, that's just insulting to me because misconception is a negative term. So that's one thing now, I think, as people who are very, what's called early adopters of AI, or maybe even innovators in this case. If we want to bring people with us together, I think it's about understanding and validating that they have fears and they have concerns about a new technology that might have legal implications, for example, and that some people would lose some of the tasks that they do on a day-to-day basis. And that will push them to retooling or reskilling or maybe finding a different type of job. I think one of the studies I was looking at that almost 40% of jobs in the A&E industry could be automated by AI. And that's just scary. You look around, in my office, there's 100 people. So I just think maybe we lose 40 of them. That's scary for someone that doesn't have the familiarity with what the technology can do and how it can benefit them, as opposed to hurting their job. So I think it starts at fundamentally is we have a duty to demystify AI and simplify it. And then just move from, there's a buzzword. People are all saying AI, it's a buzzword. But what is the practical use case? And we've already talked about a few use cases that you work on and I've worked on as well. And I think that's when the meaningful integration can start happening. It's like when you give people factual use cases, when you can tell people, just like we talked previously, is like these are some of the repetitive tasks that nobody likes to do. And half the organization is complaining about. AI use case number one. Do a survey and do a firm-wide survey. What is the top 3 things that you want to improve that might be improved by AI? Get everybody's buy-in. And that way you're giving them a stake in the game. So once they have a stake in the game, the fear, or as some would say, misconception, would start going away. Because I think most people understand that we're always going to change. Our curve is always up to the right. We're always going up. And it's not always linear. It's going to have some dips and retooling and reskilling and all those things. But if people they feel like they have agency in the process, and that you show them by these use cases that you've saved 4 hours a week, that's 10% of your time if you work on a 40-hour basis. You can use this time to be creative, and who knows, you've got a new product in the business. You've created a new product. If you're selling a new product, the business is booming as a result. So I think that's how we can start, in having people be more familiarized, and we take small bites at it. We're not taking any big bites. We're not investing a whole lot of money, but we're trying to eliminate that potential friction by getting people to the table.
This is a great segue into our next question. So what I heard was it's understanding, like, even if it's just staff engineers, whoever it is, the frontline people that frankly, make a company money, like interviewing them, figuring out their pain points, and then going to solve them. That's one piece I heard. But in your opinion, what other ways can AEC leaders successfully guide their teams through innovation and transformation while applying tools like AI to drive sustainable change?
I think to be able to answer that question, I did some research on, large companies or tech companies that have been very successful at technology adoption. And the one common denominator in every single one of these was it was all about the culture. Culture trumps everything else. So innovation, transformation, it doesn't happen in the C-suite. It happens at the front lines. It's a grassroots movement. So if you, at the C-suite, your job or, executive leadership, any type of leadership role, your job is to make sure your culture or your workforce is empowered, they're problem solving, and they feel like they can bring new ideas throughout the organization. And once you have that in your DNA as an organization, it stops becoming a friction point. It's not like you're pushing. I've heard people say, throughout my life, oh, this corporate's pushing this down on us. You never want to be in that position. You want to push, you want to push something upwards. And that's how you become successful. And that's how habits are created in an organization where people buy into these habits. They feel like they have more agency of their time. That's how I felt when I started using AI tools. I also was a non-believer at the beginning. And then I realized, like, I've got so much more time.
And
that's amazing. I can do so much more. So, yeah, no, I know I showed you this earlier. So, this is where your innovators are. It's only 2.5%, and then your early adopters. But most people exist within the other half. They don't want to take on too much risk, and they're leery. Especially our industry, we move slow, and that's a good thing because we're as old as humanity. We built the pyramids back in the day. We built the Great Wall of China. We'll probably build the futuristic city on Mars. Sorry, we built the futuristic city on Mars. In March, maybe. But
hey, it's a 1 out of 12 chance.
Exactly. So that's what people don't understand is because we're such a mature industry that things move slower, and that's okay. But to get the buy-in of the people that are not necessarily your innovators or your early adopters, it's going to happen by enabling them and giving them that agency over their life.
Absolutely. And I can speak to this from my own experience, right, Peter? I would say we're both squarely in that, first 2.5%, and then the second category, right, innovators, and then, so that would put us in either innovators or early adopters. But the truth is, it's just like most people, like you said, are going to fall. I'd even say, into the back half of the curve, the late majority and the laggards, which is fine because if you have a company that's full of the 2.5%, right, you're never going to get anything done.
Oh, absolutely. You're always innovating.
And part of the message that I heard but don't think was said explicitly, like, is if your company is set up in a manner that is completely top down, like, you will struggle with grassroots initiatives. And I think you don't have to change anything. I think it's just good for firms of that structure to understand, like, the consequences of that decision. Exactly. Because if in fact innovation is part bottom up with executive approval and buy-in, but you're not allowing that grassroots movement to come to life, you will struggle. And I have seen that firsthand. And the next question I want to ask you, Peter, is, right, once you do get that buy-in at all levels, how can engineering and technology leaders evaluate whether emerging tools like AI are truly improving project outcomes? Because it's one thing to say, I think this tool is going to help us. It's another to say, I know this tool has helped us quantitatively, and here's how I can prove it.
Absolutely. And to your point, I think you cannot make an opinion on something unless you have measurable data or things that you can track towards. And I will say, in my opinion, I think a lot of this goes back to the organization has to understand what is the problem they're trying to solve. There's a million tools out there that we can use. But unless you're trying to solve for a particular problem, and you're not, you've got your finger, first of all, you have to find the problem before you solve for it. So you have to do your research. And then once you decide this is the problem you want to solve and become laser focused on it, that's when you start tracking metrics that actually fit into that problem. And I'll tell from my experience, I've already mentioned that I've worked for two large ENR companies. First one being Terracon, that's a top 20 company. And then ECS is around the 60s in the ENR ranking. And on the outside looking in, people think that Terracon and ECS are very comparable. The similar services, due diligence, geotech, material testing during construction, and probably facilities work. But I can tell you that there's a huge difference in those two companies. There's a huge difference in how the business is managed, the business model in itself, like how the company makes money is very different. And then the problems that they're prioritizing are so different. So if you want to have a good measure for your AI tools and how are these tools performing, I think you must have an AI team or an AI task force. And that's going to be from different functions in the company. You have to have different functions in the company so you can understand how it affects different functions. And then that team or that group is going to be the one finding the problems to solve and finding what data is going to be tracked to be able to understand what the ROI looks like. Because if you don't have that information, you're going to have a lot of friction. Because any deployment will cost money. It will be a negative line item on your P&L. And people don't like spending money without knowing what they're going to get out of it and what's the organization going to benefit from.
And we talk a lot about on this podcast about solutions in search of problems. And that goes back to your first point of you need to figure out what business problem you are trying to solve with the application of any technology, AI included, and not the other way around. Because if you go, chasing shiny objects, you're going to become disappointed pretty quickly.
And it leaves a bad taste in people's minds. If your first AI projects is one that's going to cost a lot of money with no return on investment, good luck getting another one.
Yeah, that's very much true. So Peter, I mean, it's a very simple discussion on, right, the problem statement first, then finding the solution to solve it. That often involves a lot of change, because if solving that problem inevitably causes some amount of change, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be pushback, and it's just something that every leader needs to consider. So we know change is inevitable, and that comes with challenges. So what are some common pitfalls that leaders should be aware of when navigating major shifts in business practices or technology adoption?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of this question that I want your opinion on is use of technology to basically do what we do today better versus business model transformation.
That's a great question. If I were to, I think this is a good segue between the previous question you asked me and this one, is because I do believe that, especially in larger organizations where maybe the founder's been out of the organization, it has reached a critical mass. And I think of larger organization when you get in the triple digits of staff. When you're over 100, that for me, that becomes a sizable organization. I think a pitfall that I see is once you get to the higher levels in the organization, I think there's not always good data on what is the makeup of the organization. And we just looked at the innovation curve. I think it's important for us to know, like, how many people sit in, how many people are innovators? How many people are early adopters? Who's the laggard in our organization? So we can really manage for that. And you're not going to need to manage a lot for the innovators or the early adopters, but the laggards, and if they have big capital in the company, if they have a lot of political pull in the company, they might sink your initiative altogether. So that could totally ruin your deployment. Your productivity might dip. And I saw that early on in my career. We had a few laggards in the business unit I was in, and you can start seeing, it was like hitting a wall. This initiative was hitting a wall with them. And usually they end up phasing themselves out of the business and organization. But until that happens, your productivity might take a dip. So I think that's something is very important to understand is what is the makeup of your organization, so you can in return understand how you message your initiative. And you must always start with, why are we doing this? The why is going to be very important, and that why has to speak to the majority of your company. It's not going to speak to your 2% or your laggards. It's going to speak to everybody in your company. And then once you start with that why, and it's a very strong why, you can go through the how. Like, how are we going to achieve this? And this is why we're doing this. These are the business goals. And then you can tie it back to the why through the business goals, because we want our company to be the most innovative company, or we want our company to be a market dominant. And if that doesn't happen, people will resist to it because they think you're pushing something down onto them. They have no agency throughout the process, and you might have deployment failures or issues. And just like we just mentioned, if your first AI project that you took on is not one that's going to be successful, it's going to be hard getting the next one.
And what I heard there, Peter, it's excellently said. It's knowing your audience, right? It's knowing what they care about. And I think getting to the point. So for example, right, we just talked about computer vision for defect detection in asphalt, right? Does the non-technical business leader of the company care to know about, right, the models and how we determine if we crack seal or do? Probably not, right? But do they care about the efficiencies and the change in business model that will make them competitive, show up on the P&L? Absolutely.
Exactly.
So it's knowing your audience, knowing what they care about, and just getting to the point, because then that buys you agency to then actually implement your plan, as long as they understand what you're trying to say.
Exactly. And nothing happens without funding. And if you're going to go to pitch to your C-suite or to your finance team that this is why I need the money to do this project, you better have a plan where this money is going to be improving the company on the long term, and it's not going to affect the profit and loss for an extended period of time.
And speaking their language, so up and down the ladder, right? Like, you need to be able to speak the language of your senior leadership, your finance team, but also, right, the front lines that are going to be using this technology and that make you money. So being able to, it's communicating up, it's communicating down, but I do think people will get lost in, well, if I can sell it up, I'm okay. That's important and usually the first step, but implementation, in my opinion, is the hardest part of all of this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, if you're always selling upstream and not looking downstream, you're losing the majority of your company, because the majority of your company is not going to be in the C-suite. It's going to be on the front line.
And right, because I lived on the front lines my whole career, and it was always puzzling to me. But what I realize is, even though these people, like, who, right, boots on the ground, they're in the field, making your company money, don't have authority or pull by title, right? They do by action, and being able to speak to them and make them successful is it's the most important thing you can do.
Exactly. Operations make money. That's where the money's made.
And that is really well said. Okay, so Peter, so we just spoke about change, and that's a constant theme when it comes to innovation and how rapidly everything is moving in our world today, but specifically our industry, especially because, like you said before, we're a mature industry, we're not bleeding edge, and there's a number of good reasons for that. So my next question is, what skills will be most critical for the next generation of engineers and scientists to thrive as the industry evolves? Because, like we've discussed, change is coming, it's inevitable, and we need to prepare for it.
And I think it's such an important topic to touch on because anything could happen in the world. But in my opinion, there's a few skills, they're so fundamental that they will always be helpful in perpetuity to differentiate. You ask engineers or scientists to differentiate anybody in any business. And I think the first one, obviously, is critical thinking. AI will not do that for you. That's something you have to do yourself. And you have to practice for many, many years to be able to clearly, dissect problems in order to find solutions. AI, in this case, will only amplify your decision making, but critical thinking is key. Number 2, I think, obviously, is communication. It has to be clear, has to be concise, and you must avoid jargon at all costs. And I find this every single day. I'm talking with colleagues and people in the industry, and they're using all sorts of jargon. I'm like, the second you start doing that, no one understands what you're saying. Unless the person who's working next to you. But everybody else has no clue.
And that gets back to knowing your audience, right? And
exactly.
getting to the point. Please continue.
Exactly. Absolutely. And then the biggest thing about communication is talk less and listen more. The fundamental thing about communication. Listen, not to respond, but listen to understand. And that ties into the third skill that I'm going to talk about, which is have an open mind and approach everything as a learning experience. As you can see now, there's almost no barrier to knowledge. You don't have to pay $200,000 to get an education. You can go on ChatGPT and learn about any topic that has ever been discovered in the history of humanity. So there's no excuse for lack of learning, in my opinion. So I think you put those 3 skills combined, and you almost become unstoppable.
And what I think was implicitly said there, Peter, is those skills you mentioned are complementary to the use of technology, including AI, because they're all things that AI cannot do for you.
Exactly.
It cannot think critically for you, right? When you're in a boardroom or in the field communicating to other people, right? You can't just pull out an LLM and start asking it questions, right? You need to be able to communicate. And there's always going to be subtlety and nuance and that human factor that no technology has been able to replace today. So I really appreciate that line of thinking you've given us, because it's what is important about that. It's not replaceable by a machine.
Exactly. It's not replaceable since the inception of humanity. The tool changes. This particular skill set will be there in perpetuity.
Really well said. And another great segue. It's almost as if these questions were written back to back so they'd flow so nicely. Talent shortages. We hear about it all the time. I think more so in the construction sector, more so for craftspeople, trade labor, the people who are actually, putting work in place, right? But it's the same story in, the AE or the design sector. So civil engineers, right? If you look up studies by AEC, right, declining enrollments, less civil engineers entering the workforce. But it's a similar story across the industry. What are some effective ways we can attract and inspire the next generation of engineers and scientists?
I tend to spend a little bit of time on that topic because it is so tied to the future of our industry. Is we want to have talented, skilled people that will dedicate their lives to this industry. Like yourself, when I met you, I realized that there's so many high-skilled people in this industry that we don't have recognition of because we're not an industry that has the cool factor. Even though we're such a big industry, we're like 5% of GDP. So like $1.5 trillion a year. But we're not like Silicon Valley, and we don't pay people a lot of money. Our margins are low. But on the other side of the equation, we're very mature. We're very diversified. We cover all sorts of construction types or renovations, and we're also very stable. So I think if you can take that stability and add some cool factor to it, for example, if you can encourage more of a startup culture within the AEC industry, you're signaling to the world that you're invested in the future, that you're invested in technology, and that will be very compelling. That will be a very compelling value proposition that will attract more people to the industry. And it doesn't have to be people that went to engineering school or architecture school or construction school. Those can be people from all walks of life. They would be attracted to your industry, and it will add velocity. It will allow us to do things with more. It will allow us to do more with less people, because we know, we have declining population in certain instances, so that might always be a challenge. So I think that's an important thing we want to focus on, is we want to bring back that cool factor in the industry. And I could think of the example of Google. They have their innovation lab or their moonshot program, where they give people up to 20% of their time to go work on this highly innovative idea, this out of the world idea. And that's how Gmail was actually created, as part of this initiative. We've got some really big companies with a lot of resources. I think of the big, at least the ENR 100 companies. They all have resources they can invest, and they can all have their small startup incubator or be part of a larger incubator as well. So that's definitely one thing that could allow us to attract more people. And I think the other thing we talked about briefly in this episode was the fact that we do have a lot of hierarchy in organizations. And I know people in our generation, like I'm a millennial. You're probably a Gen Z.
I'm also a millennial.
You're also a millennial. Okay, excellent. The new generation, Gen Z, they all want to have more ownership of what they're doing, and they all want to work in organizations where they feel like they're making a big impact, even early on in their career. So I think if we can flatten our organizations a little bit, not have so many layers, I think that could also help attract more people, just by eliminating some of that fluff, some of that middle management that might be in there. It's been there for a while, is inhibiting some of that innovation. That could be something that can help, in my opinion.
And I can speak to that specifically, innovation being stifled by some layers. Personally, it does happen, but what it teaches you, I think, is that individual approach, bottom up, is how to work within organizations. So, to any leaders that are listening, you may have these people in your organizations trying to make positive change, but you just may be completely unaware of them because they don't have the right rank or title or years of experience. So if you if you have somebody who's, on their way up and showing a lot of promise, right? Like Peter's boss did to him early in his career, take the time to train them, mentor them, because that's what keeps people are stuck around at companies and in the industry overall.
Exactly. You're providing people a lot of room to grow. It's like white space. You're providing them white space to grow, and you'd be surprised what people can actually achieve once you give them that power. You empower them to do great things.
And exactly, and for previous companies that I've worked for, again, speaking from experience, right? Like, unfortunately, was just thought of as just a regular project engineer. No room for growth or strategy, or if there was, it would be, in the minds of the leaders, a decade plus before it would happen, just because that was the usual path. But in my case, I was fortunate to find a company who believed in my abilities, right, and has given me the opportunity. So if you're in that position too, in the audience just listening, it just, wherever you're at, just may not be the right fit for you. So just think about what you want out of your career and how you might be able to get that. So Peter, this has been great, super informative to me. Always love taking the chance to sit down and talk to you. But what final piece of advice can you give to AEC professionals who aspire to lead meaningful transformation through both innovation and sustainability?
That's the type of question that gives me the chills, because you know how passionate I am about this topic. I think one of the things that I can speak about is, over the course of my career, I was always the odd person out. And a lot of people told me, it's like, you must conform. That's the expectation. You should be dressed up a certain way. You should be talking a certain way. And then up until a moment when a mentor told me, is like, the best thing that ever happened to him was when he started leaning into his personality and who he is as a person. So he stopped trying to look like someone else. And that's the best piece of advice I can give to someone, is don't be afraid to be yourself, even if you're different than everybody else. Because nobody changed the world by doing what everybody else is doing. People change the world, like Elon Musk is an odd person. He's outside of that normal distribution. I don't even know where he stands. But he's the richest man in the world, and he's changing the world. So that's one piece of advice I can give to people. And then another one that was given to me a lot, but be patient, but also be aggressively patient. That's an advice Nick gave to me. Be patient, but in some instances, you also have to be aggressive. So mix the two things together, and that would be the best piece of advice I can give to your listeners.
Really well said, Peter. And sounds like a smart guy who gave you that last piece of advice, right?
I'm very thankful for him. That was he was an attorney in my previous company.
Excellent. So Peter, thank you again for joining us today. If the listeners want to connect with you, ask you questions about what we discussed today, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Absolutely. Please, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I think that's the best platform to connect. So LinkedIn would be first name, Nabhan, Peter Nabhan on LinkedIn. We'd be love to answer any questions you have.
Beautiful. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you will find a summary of key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering and technology endeavors. Thank you.